welcome Josh Malin, ginetta GT5 champion. How are you?
I'm not too bad, thanks, mate. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thank you for coming on and getting involved.
No worries. Thank you for having me.
No worries. It'll be great to chat racing. And where did racing start for you? How did you get into it?
So back in 2013, my neighbour John Halliwell, he runs an MX5 racing championship. He moved in next door to me by pure coincidence. At that point, I was still doing a lot of simulator work, not to the extent which I do now, but he came around for dinner one evening. He saw me having a go on the simulator, and he was like, "Oh yeah, can I have a go?"
Yeah.
So I was like, "Yeah, far away. You can turn some laps." I think it was an MX5 round Alton Park, and I was like 4 or 5 seconds faster than him, and he just looked at me. I was like, "How did you do that?" So yeah, it sort of spiraled from there, and he basically said, "Look, I'll build you a car. See
Yeah.
if you can translate your sim skills into real life, and well, the rest is history."
Really? That's crazy. And how lucky is that as well? That's a great story.
It was, yeah. I mean, it was quite a good coincidence from my point of view, obviously, but I think for his as well,
Yeah.
because he obviously had the sort of getting the hands on and making the car and watching me go from the Mark Ones, which I started out in. I think my first ever race, I finished second.
Really.
Um, Somehow, I don't know how, but I managed it. And in my first full year of racing, I won the championship in
Yeah.
the Mark One MX5, and then a year later in the Mark Three MX5, I won the championship in that as well.
Mate, it's incredible. Had you always been a fan before then of racing in general?
Yeah, I mean, well, I've loved cars since I could say the word car, so presumably from a very, very young age. So I always had sort of some form of car computer game around me,
Yeah.
whether it was like the original Disney Pixar Cars. I remember that.
Oh, that was a good
That,
game. That was a
that
good
was
game.
absolutely cracking, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And then it went up like through TOCA,
Yeah.
Colin McRae Rally, um, and eventually it went on to the PlayStation and Gran Turismo, and it's evolved from there
Yeah.
up to iRacing and Assetto Corsa now. So as age has increased, everything's got more serious. And now that I'm very sort of lucky to be at the level I am now, I do have to sort of take it quite seriously, but I also enjoy it at the same time.
Yeah.
So yeah, sim racing is heavily part of how I've become a racing driver.
Absolutely. And you mentioned that you started with the Mazdas. How much experience did you have before then? Obviously, you did lots of sim racing, but did you ever do anything like go-karting?
No, is the honest answer. I
Yeah.
think I went to team sport karting down in Southampton sort of a few a few times. It
Yeah.
wasn't that regularly. And even from there, I think my dad saw that I was obviously quite quick. I
Yeah.
wasn't the quickest, but at that point, I had little to no experience. So I think he definitely saw something in me, um, even before we saw John come along on the horizon and get us into a real racing car. So karting hasn't really been much of a thing for me, and it's just arrive and drive at team sport a couple of times, and that's about it.
Okay. Yeah, I was wondering. It's quite interesting with karting because you see, most drivers do start with it, but not everyone does. And would you say it's still one of the best ways to start?
I'd say so. I think as I made the progression from MX5s into the ginetta GT5 Challenge, there were a few bits that were missing from my racecraft. I didn't
Uh-huh.
like to race nice and close to other cars. I think that kind of spooked me
Yeah.
initially. So I'd say that karting is great for the racecraft, but if you don't have the budget for karting, then I'd say that sim racing is definitely a very valid gateway of getting into real life racing should you make all ends meet.
Absolutely, and it's very quickly becoming more and more popular, especially with, last year, the different lockdowns and stuff. Everyone was on the sim.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, me included. I was doing the Power Max Racing E Series,
Yeah.
and had a really good time in that. And there's also a couple of other leagues, Digital Motorsports, my digital sponsors. They were hosting a league over the lockdown, and slightly after that as well, in the BMW M8s and M4s on iRacing, which was good fun as well. So it's been keeping me busy. It's been keeping me occupied, and yeah, I really enjoy it anyway. So it's a good way to kill time.
Yeah, absolutely. And what was the transition like from sim racing to racing in the real world, obviously in the Mazdas?
I'd say that you felt a lot more in terms of motion.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say G forces because MX5s don't really pull that many G forces, but there you go.
Yeah.
So it was mainly motion. The sim does really help in terms of visualizing your lines and rough undulations. But when I first went down Craner curves, my first race was at Donington Park. When I first went down Craner curves, I was like, "Whoa!" It really didn't.
Yeah.
It really didn't sort of give you a good indication as to how sort of steep it was. So I'd say the only downfall in the sim racing world is that the undulations aren't always pitch perfect, but they do
Yeah.
give you a good idea. So I would definitely say that the motion was the main change. The physical driving aspect,
Yeah.
I translated it fairly well, and it was just a case of adapting to how the pedals were mounted in the car, and obviously the gear shifter moving around slightly due to the forces as well. So it was a bit of a learning curve, but it wasn't as steep as I thought it would have been.
Okay, yeah. Obviously, I do a little bit of sim racing here and there. How accurate really is it compared to real world racing? Because I can't really tell at the minute. So,
Yeah, no, I mean, it depends what sim you get. I mean, iRacing, it's an absolutely fantastic platform. I do find that the tyre models and the damage models are fairly close.
yeah,
But with sim racing, you're never going to be absolutely pitch perfect on it. So I'd say that iRacing is probably the best from my point of view. But loads of people will say different. People will say Assetto Corsa, R Factor, and other
yeah,
sims like that. So it's down to personal preference, really. But I prefer iRacing.
absolutely. So, when you started racing in the real world, was it how you imagined it, and did it live up to expectations?
Oh yeah, for sure. It exceeded expectations. It was like you could really feel. Obviously, in the real world, you can feel the tire pushing on, and obviously you can feel the car start moving. Whereas in the sim, you only have the force feedback in your
Yeah,
hand to sort of detect that. So it was quite nice to sort of feel the car moving around you. But it really lived up to my expectations, and I definitely do not regret it in any sense.
and what were the Mazdas like to drive?
To be fair, they were brilliant. I do sort of miss racing the MX5. I actually do have mine sitting just behind there. I've got a road car as well, Mark III MX5, which
Nice.
I love to bits.
Yeah,
So the MX5s were really balanced, especially the Mark ones in the wet. In
yeah,
the dry, it was hard to sort of slide the Mark ones. Maybe it was due to the tyres that we were on. I'm not so sure. Maybe it was because I was only 16 and not at the full limit yet. But no, I really enjoyed driving the MX5s. And if someone said, "Yeah, do you want to come and drive an MX5?" I wouldn't say no, because they're a fantastic driver's car. And I think without that car, there wouldn't be a few of the other sports cars that are on sale today in the real world as well. So
absolutely. And would you recommend the championships that you raced in to start off with?
definitely, I mean, in terms of value for money, I think the most you're going to be spending is around about £10,000 for a season,
Yeah,
which now
that's
doesn't sound
pretty
like a
good.
lot compared to
Yeah,
what we're doing now. And at first it was a bit daunting having that sort of that money offset. But yeah, it was. I would definitely recommend getting into MX5s because the racing is great. I mean, you learn a lot about car control. I know I certainly have for a fact because they do move around, as I said, they do move around quite a lot. So
Yeah.
I would say that MX5 is a great sort of entry series to get into. I mean, failing that, you've got junior saloon cars out there.
Yeah.
And then obviously the obvious route of karting. So again, it's personal preference, but I found that the MX5s really did help me become or have some traits from sort of driving an MX5. I think that has helped me as a driver as well further down the line.
Absolutely. And did you get a favourite circuit?
Favourite circuit in the MX5? It's quite a hard one. I mean, I love Donington Park. But we did actually go to Cadwell Park in the when I was racing the Mark III MX5s, and that's a cracking track. I also do really like Croft as well. That's quite a good circuit. I did that in the Mark Ones in 2017. So I'd probably say Cadwell Park because it's just like a mini Nürburgring, if you like.
Absolutely. We've got some great circuits in the UK.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, Alton Park. We didn't do that in the MX5s, but obviously started it in the Ginettas. And yeah, I love that track.
Yeah.
I like pretty much all of the tracks around the country. So I don't really have a preference as such. But if I had to pick one, it would probably be Donington Park.
Yeah, it's a personal favourite of mine as well. It's still on the bucket list to go at some point. So.
Yeah. I mean, you'll be surprised at the elevation changes down Craner curves and like sort of the open plain. It's a really nice circuit, and you can see most of it from when you're spectating at Redgate Corner as well.
Really, yeah.
You can see up all the way up to McLean's as well. So you can see quite a way away.
Absolutely. So, how many years did you spend in Mazdas?
So I spent half a season in 2016. That overlapped with my GCSEs. I think I finished my last GCSE on the 17th of June.
Yeah.
And that afternoon, I went off testing the MX5 for
the
first time.
That is brilliant.
Just to give it a shakedown, just to make sure everything was okay before going up 2 days later to Donington Park, where I finished my first race in second. I don't know how, but
that's crazy.
So, it was half a season in 2016, and I did a full season in 2017 in the Mark I MX5, and then the Mark III MX5 I did a full season in 2018, and then I transitioned to the Ginettas.
And you won both championships in the Mazdas as well?
Yeah. So I won Class B at the time, which was the Mark I class, so the old MX5 with the pop-up headlights. Yeah. And then the Mark III, which is the slightly newer one from around about 2007. I won that in 2018, which was Class A.
Yeah. Well, first of all, congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah.
Did you, as the season went on, did you start to feel more and more pressure building up, and maybe see it less as a fun thing to do at the weekends and more serious as well?
I always saw it as a hobby when I was racing MX5s. I always sort of really enjoyed it, and obviously I wanted to make it as a sort of a bigger racing driver, if that makes any sense. So I would say that towards the end of the season, the pressure did sort of mount a little bit. Mm-hmm. I mean, you always get that massive adrenaline buzz when you're on the start line and with the lights ready to go out there. That does give you a massive adrenaline rush. But I'd say that the pressure did definitely mount at the end of the 2018 season. Because long story short, we did qualifying, and I think we took the wheels off. I think we changed over the tyres, ready for the first race, because I think it was quite a wet race, and we decided to get some fresher rubber because the fresher rubber was better in the wet. We had a control tyre. I think it was a Nankang NS2R tyre, which was they're a good budget tyre.
Yeah.
Not the greatest tyres in the wet. So Yeah, the first race came along at the final race meeting at Brands Hatch. I think it was Brands Hatch Indy, and yeah, I set off in the lead. I think I'm leading by about a second or two. And then I start getting a really bad knocking noise from like the front right hand
Ooh.
side of the car.
Yeah.
I pull into the pits, obviously panicking. I didn't really want to brake the car. And turns out that we somehow forgot to do up the front left wheel nuts.
Oh no.
So I was going around the
Oh
track
man.
with the wheel going
Yeah.
slapping against the I think it was against the spigot rings. I can't remember what it was that was it was hitting against, but it was making a hell of a racket
Yeah.
and quite a bad vibration as well. I managed to stop in the pits, jump out the car, get a torque wrench, because this was when we all ran the cars ourselves,
Yeah.
and grabbed the torque wrench, ran round, did up the wheel nuts, jumped back in the car, set off, and I finished stone dead last,
Yeah.
but I got fastest lap.
Really.
I
Yeah.
don't think we got a point for the fastest lap at that point.
Right.
So it didn't really help me as such, but it certainly gave me a bit of a morale boost after a pretty dismal first race. And then the second race, I come from essentially the back of the grid to win my class.
Yeah.
And yeah, the rest is history.
Yeah, that's incredible. What advice would you give to any racing drivers, you know, going into important race weekends and having to deal with pressure? What advice would you give to them?
It's easier said than done, but I'd try and just keep a cooler head as possible. I know going into the final race meeting at Brands Hatch and also the final race meeting at Silverstone back in November, I had sort of a slight cushion of points. I think about 7 points back in November.
Yeah.
And I knew that the pressure was on. I knew the pressure was on for sure.
Yeah.
So I didn't have a great first race. And so the second race was where everything mattered. And while I was out on track, I totally forgot about the championship. I just forgot about everything and just concentrated on the job in hand. I think if you start thinking about those things and overthinking it too much, then you are probably going to force yourself into a few mistakes that you might not usually make. So I'd say just try and focus on the job in hand. Forget that you're in any sort of championship battle, and just try and do the best you can. Because at the end of the day, that's all you can do. So that was what I did back in November when I managed to clinch the GT5 title, which was yeah, I still can't believe it, but there you go.
Yeah, it's good advice. So correct me if I'm wrong, you moved to ginetta GT5s in 2020?
2019.
2019. So
Yeah.
where did that deal come about?
You know what? I don't know. I actually don't know. So at the end of the 2018 season, obviously I won the championship, and me and my dad were sort of thinking, yeah, the MX-5s are great, but if you want to make a career of this, we're going to need to sort of try and go elsewhere and explore different series.
Yeah.
And so we started looking at, and obviously for a relatively low-ish budget, I use that term loosely. And I think somehow we came across the ginetta sort of packages. Obviously, we knew about juniors and everything with the within the touring car package. Because we did watch a fair bit of touring cars back then, and the GT5s were actually never something that we'd heard of.
Yeah.
And until sort of early 2019. So we managed to get hold of Gwyn at Richardson Racing, and I think we were in discussion with a couple of other teams as well, but obviously Richardson Racing were the people that we went with.
Yeah.
And I think that was probably the best decision that we made. The boys at Richardson throughout 2019 and 2020 were absolutely fantastic. And I hope to continue racing with them in some other series this year. So yeah, we managed to get talking to Gwyn and managed to get a deal together. And I think we signed up like a week or two before media day. So
Really? Yeah.
it was always lastminute.com, which is always the way.
Of course.
So yeah, it just happened all so quickly.
Yeah.
I'd say we probably got a bit startled by it. I know I did for the first race. I mean, I know at media day I think I went from a 2 minutes 12 round Snetterton to a 2:08 in
Yeah.
one day. That was with Mike Epps coaching me, telling me how to drive the car properly, because I was still driving it how I drove an MX-5.
Right.
So that's sort of basically that's the totally wrong way to do it.
Yeah.
Simply put. So he managed to get my times down from a 2 minutes 12 to like a 2:08, and I was second quickest by the end of the day, which I was really, really happy with.
Yeah.
I never thought that would have happened, considering that the Ginettas is always a really competitive series, no matter what class it is, whether it's juniors, GT5s, the Super Cup, etc. Yeah. So yeah, I was quite shocked at how I managed to sort of get on it as quick as I did. But obviously, during the race weekends, I think there needed a little bit more fine tuning, let's just say.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that, because I was going to ask, how different are the Ginettas compared to the Mazdas that you previously drove?
So the MX-5s were on road tyres with the standard H-pattern gearbox. It was basically standard running gear. We were on aftermarket coilovers to obviously help improve the handling and adjust the stiffness. But other than that, it was a fairly sort of road car-y race car, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Not really a lot has been changed. It was just stripped out, and that was about it, really. Had a nice exhaust mix, so it sounded good. But the difference between the MX-5s and the Ginettas are far more of a racing car. They've got a proper Quaife sequential gearbox. The GT5s have got slicks. They had about the same power output, but the Ginettas were lighter as well. So they were quite a bit more agile, and they didn't sort of roll as much as the MX-5s did. Obviously, there is still a bit of body roll in the G40 chassis. So yeah, I'd say that the Ginettas, the way to extract the performance out of it, you have to do it in a very different way compared to driving an MX-5. I think if you drove a Ginetta the way you do an MX-5, you would be off the pace immediately.
Yeah.
Which is exactly what I did at media day. So I would say that driving a Ginetta is obviously harder, but it's a lot more rewarding should you get it right.
Yeah, absolutely. They're very cool cars. And just quickly before we continue with how you got on with the Ginettas, were there any other possible championships that you looked into that you liked the look of or wanted to do?
We did look at Caterhams. I think that was it the Caterham Academy, or I think it was the 420R Championship. I can't remember exactly. But yeah, no, Caterhams were on the list. And there was I can't remember what else. There was one other that I can't remember.
Yeah, I think often it's about being realistic, especially with budget as well. So
yeah. Even now, budget's still a big thing for us. I mean, I must be honest, I still don't know how we've made the past 2 years work.
Really,
but we've managed to do it. And well, here we are now. I'd say that budget, it does have a big influence on what you do. But if something's slightly out of your budget, but it's got a far more appealing package to it, much like the GT5s or say juniors, for example, with all the TV coverage and hospitality. Well, hospitality in 2019, not so much 2020. But let's not talk about that.
No.
So I'd say that it's definitely worth the extra cash if you can make it work. I'd say doing that would prove sort of better off in the long run, at least.
Yeah. And I know it's the most sort of expensive way to start, but would you have ever gone down the open wheel route of racing?
My well, as a matter of fact, my uncle actually has a Van Diemen RF83,
Really? Yeah.
and it was something that I was sort of half considering, but my mum and dad were like, "No, you're not racing open wheel. If you clash tires, you're going to go flying into the atmosphere." And
Yeah.
I was like, "Yeah, okay, you might be right." So I closed wheel has been mainly my interest, but that doesn't say that British F4 isn't a good route to go down, or historic Formula Fords, etc. So it depends it depends what you like,
Yeah.
but for me, open wheel wasn't really my sort of thing.
Hmm. Absolutely. And are you pleased you moved to the ginetta GT5s?
Oh, 100%, 100%. It really taught me a lot in terms of obviously driving a car fast. There were quite a few things that I realized that I was missing in the MX5s.
Mm.
So looking back at MX5 footage, I can sort of pinpoint, yeah, you should have done this better, this, that, and the other. And it really does sort of make you a quicker driver, that's for sure. I mean, having a driver coach does help, and Mike Epps has literally transformed me as a driver
Yeah.
since 2019. So thank you to Mike, because he's been a very, very instrumental part in how my driver career has developed.
So from the previous experience of the Mazdas, did it help when you were battling for the championship, when you had the previous experience from not only your sim racing beforehand, but also with the Mazdas in the real world?
I'd say it probably did, but in terms of racecraft, especially at the end of the 2020 season, in the GT5s, I'd say that if I was racing MX5s the year before and I was in that position, I would not have done half of the things that I did in that race.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have been anywhere near as sort of close or as aggressive in inverted commas.
Yeah.
So, excuse me, I would say that Mazda's helped me learn car control, but racecraft, I think the Ginetta's taught me a lot more.
Absolutely. Well, I won't keep you for too much longer. You've been absolutely brilliant. Just to finish off, what would you? Is there any championships or races that are still on your bucket list that you'd love to do, and an aim for you in the future?
To be fair, there is quite a few, mainly within the UK.
Yeah.
I would love to get involved with the Carrera Cup at some
Yeah.
point. So obviously going through the ranks, I'd say I'd probably like to follow the Ginetta pathway first,
Yeah.
because being a part of the Ginetta ladder, I'm really sort of interested in following that pathway, and they've introduced a new series called GT Pro, which is essentially on the back of the Super Cup grid using a Ginetta GT Academy car, which is slightly less horsepower, around about 300, but it's
Yeah.
on road tires and it's got less aero as well. So I'd say that would be my realistic next sort of stop. Obviously, we've got to get the budget together, and then after that, you can get into the GT4 Super Cup. Should you win GT Pro, you get a heavily subsidised GT4 Super Cup drive. So in the long run, I'd like to do GT Pro, then GT4 Super Cup, and then that could potentially lead to a British GT drive with a factory affiliated team. So I'd say that GT4 Super Cup and Porsche Carrera Cup are the two sort of main ones that I want to be focusing on within the next 5 years at a maximum.
Yeah.
But also, should I win the Super Cup, I'd definitely take up on a British GT drive.
Yeah.
So it's all about what happens. It's all well and good having a plan. Yeah. So British GT, I would definitely take up the opportunity should I win the Super Cup further down the line. But obviously, it's not everything goes to plan, so you need to obviously try and do your best. That's obviously the first port of call.
Yeah.
But if it doesn't go to plan, then you'll have some form of alternative. But ultimately, Porsche Carrera Cup and then touring cars, I think that would be a fantastic sort of journey for me.
Yeah.
And then obviously getting involved with the touring cars, it's something that I've always wanted to do, because watching the touring cars on TV, it's absolutely great to watch.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So it's definitely something that I'd want to do further down the line. Obviously, it's mainly budget. It's all well and good wanting to do something, but if you don't have the budget to do it, then you don't really have a hope, which is the main motorsport downfall. Unfortunately, it's one of those things, unfortunately, and we just got to work our way around it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'd definitely like to be in touring cars at some point.
Yeah, it's funny. I've asked that question to a lot of young and up and coming drivers, but most of them have said British touring cars, and yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'd love to do Carrera Cup as well. I mean, I just said about Carrera Cup, but I do a lot of Porsche Cup driving on iRacing.
Yeah,
I was lucky enough to test one at the end of the 2019 season.
Really?
Briefly with on a Porsche Taster Day, and honestly, it was the stuff of dreams.
Really? Yeah.
It was an absolutely magical car to drive. It was hard to get used to at the start, with obviously having really powerful brakes and no anti-lock braking system to help you. Obviously, I'm used to no ABS, but I'm not used to that punch. And I did lock up a few times, which wasn't ideal.
Yeah.
And obviously, you've got the aero as well. It's not the biggest aero package there is, but obviously it's enough to make a difference.
Yeah.
So I in the short term, I'd love to try and get up to Carrera Cup, but looking at sort of the budgets of that compared to the Ginettas at the moment, it's a bit out of reach. But who's to say it won't happen?
Yeah, exactly. And it's funny because we like most of my family follow the Porsche Carrera Cup, because obviously it's on the Toka support package when we're watching British touring cars. And it's a really cool championship, because, you know, these cars are so fast, and we saw, you know, great drivers like Harry King, Josh Webster fighting it out. But it's funny because it's an interesting dynamic, because we're on these really tight British circuits as well. So it's an added challenge, I think, as well, which is quite interesting.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think Brands Hatch Indy is probably one of the sort of the odd tracks to drive in a 500 horsepower 911 GT3 car. Being as it's like such a short lap, it's like accelerate, brake, turn, accelerate. Oh, there we go. I'm at the start line now.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, I'd say that some of the tracks aren't really suited to the 911, but it makes for great racing regardless. And it's definitely something I want to do in the future.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so very much for coming on and having a chat. You've given, you know, a brilliant insight to racing and what goes on, and given some great advice, which is brilliant.
Right, no worries. Pleasure to be here.
No worries. Thank you. So I've been Louis Hedge. Thank you very much, Josh Malin. See you soon.